Thank you everyone for participating in today's Safe Water Conservation Collaborative webinar on planning for success. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. We do want this to be a conversation, not a presentation. So just like we talked about at last month's webinar, we encourage everyone to please turn on your cameras and leave yourself unmuted so that we can really foster a conversation today. And of course, we put in parentheses within reason. If you have to take another phone call or anything like that nature, of course, mute yourself, but please feel free to be unmuted so that you can jump in and out. A recording of today's webinar will be posted on our website at safewatercollaborative.org, along with the full survey results that we'll be talking about and a copy of this presentation. And lastly, again, please feel free to speak up at any time so that we can really foster a good sense of conversation with this. So where we'll start is just with reaffirming our vision, mission, and values. Our vision here is that we get to the place of being a sustained, vibrant network where we're truly working together on land conservation and stewardship practices with the goal of protecting safe, clean drinking water in the communities we serve, which is currently Jefferson and Berkeley counties, West Virginia, here in the Eastern Panhandle. We achieve that vision by working towards our mission of protecting drinking water through land conservation. As you all have heard us talk before, we always show this in two colors because the core of our work is protecting drinking water. We get there by accomplishing our primary strategy, which is land conservation, which includes both voluntary conservation easements to protect land forever from the impacts of development, as well as voluntary conservation practices such as riparian forest buffers or fencing cattle out of streams or other agricultural BMPs that again circle back to that core part of our mission of protecting drinking water. And thirdly, we always like to show this image just to get us in the mindset of where our values are at. The core of our work at the forefront here is safe, clean drinking water. And behind that are all of the values that we hold dear, which is safe, clean rivers and streams, our future, which is our children, or our heritage and our legacy, our past, our agricultural lands, our landscapes, all of those things that we hold dear. And by protecting those things, we'll have that core benefit of protecting safe, clean drinking water. So where we're going to start with today's webinar is right where we left off last month with this question of why conduct a strategic planning survey. We have recently received support from the EPA Region 3 Source Water Protection Division out of Philadelphia for the collaborative to receive the support of a contractor to work with us over the next year on creating a strategic plan. We showed this chart as well last time. The history of the collaborative, we had the Elk River chemical spill back in 2014. Source water protection plans went into effect in about 2016. We spent probably 2016 through 2018 in those early phases of considering a collaborative effort, forming a new collaborative. I came on in May of 2019, really took us through that second phase of forming a collaborative, really getting a structure to our work. And we're at the phase now of really advancing our developing collaborative, and also just that constant phase of maintaining our collaborative, keeping all of us here at the table, working together for our shared mission and objectives. So that that contracted support from EPA will provide us with ultimately a strategic plan. And just as some high level points on why we would want that plan will give us all a sense of ownership, priority, and purpose within the collaborative. It'll define our concrete goals and objectives and our strategies for achieving those. And lastly, it'll help define how we measure progress moving forward. And all of those things taken together will lead to success, which will help us secure more funding, which will lead to more success in the future. So it'll really put us on the path of sustainability and longevity for the collaborative. We currently do have, if you all haven't looked at this, I encourage you to do so. We have a 5-year action plan, kind of our long-term visioning document called Private Lands, Public Waters, that lays out some of our long-term goals. It was created in 2017, 2018, when the collaborative was still very new. So that, now that we have more partners and a lot of progress and momentum underneath us, it's the perfect time to dig into this again as a true large-scale partnership, so that we can strengthen our partnership through that strategic planning process. I'm not going to read all of these, but we do like to show this slide that no matter in that current plan, if we're talking about policy priorities, public awareness and outreach, or collaborating on land conservation, the through line of all of that is protecting drinking water. And again, we get there with that primary strategy of land conservation. And it's fair to say that as we look at this document from our past, that these might not be our priorities moving forward, as again, they were developed when the collaborative was still new. So it's helpful to see where we are currently. That helps frame the conversation as we move forward and we seek new goals and objectives and strategies. So that's the background information. Before we get into the survey results, I should pause and just see if anyone has any, if not questions, comments, or anything that they would like to add based off of where we are and maybe why we're entering into these conversations about strategic planning.
Tanner, this is Sylvia, Mom. I did want to jump in at the moment, but when you showed the graphic from the How to Collaborate Toolkit from the Source Water Collaborative, the stages of collaborative development, I was thrilled to see that because I was involved in developing it when I was at EPA. So it's really nice to see that being used and being useful for you all. And I'm really glad to be part of this conversation. So
well, thank you for joining us, Sylvia. And I think it very, it succinctly shows, where we've been and where we're going to and what we're driving towards. So thank you for speaking up, Sylvia. Any other comments before we move into the conversation for today? Okay. So we'll start just with what it looked like. This is kind of a survey webinar combo. The survey results are what we'll be discussing today. We've heard back in that survey from about 25% of the collaborative, 20 out of about 81 people. And that's really good. Just as kind of a summary of that, we have a few decision-making bodies within the collaborative. We have 3 active work groups and a steering committee. In total, there's about 30 people that serve on those. And we heard from 15 out of 30, or about 50% of our core active members, as well as a few of our general supporters, some folks that are on kind of the outer tier of our work, aren't directly serving at that same capacity, but have really critical and important insight into the success of our work moving forward. So just it's a good way of looking at who we heard from and seeing that this is a good relative sampling from across the collaborative. We'll say it here and also at the very end, but thank you for participating in that. We've talked about this many times, that the collaborative only works with your participation. And it might not often feel like it, but sharing our insights and ideas in those digital surveys where we take 10 or 15 minutes to convey our thoughts, and then these follow-up webinars, it's a critical component of our work. And it is truly what's helping us maintain our momentum and build upon it and build upon our network during the pandemic. At times when we can't get together, this has been a really strong thing for us. And so your time and energy is what makes that succeed. And as we'll be discussing today, your time and energy is what will make the collaborative what it will be as we move forward. So above all else, as we're talking today, thank you for that. When we start discussing the survey results themselves, some of these will lend towards more conversations, some less. Feel free to jump in at any time. This was where we started with our questions of just in general, what time frame is best for our plan? Is it short term, middle term, long term? The number that really rose to the top for folks here is a 5-year action plan. Those shorter time frames or longer time frames had a few less responses. I don't have any key insights into this. This one I think just tells us where we're thinking what time frame we want to look for in our plan, but we do want to open it up. If anyone, does anyone have any insights to share regarding the time frame for our plan, or the reasons why 5-year is best, or a case for shorter or longer term? We'd love to open it up if anyone has any insights here.
Tanner, this is Mark Chavone. I think the reason why the 5, 3, and 1 year ended up being the top vote getters is that most plans I'm familiar with have a 1, 3, and 5 year component to them. So I think that that's true of the other organizations. That's what seems to be the right fit.
Okay. I appreciate that, Mark. It's what our current plan is a 5-year plan, so it's in line with that. Anything else to add to Mark's comments?
Tanner, this is Georgia. One of the things I'd be interested in hearing about is we're used to 5-year plans, but I don't know if that's effective or if they start to lose steam. I kind of looked around to see how many groups were doing more shorter term, like 3-year plans, or if they were doing 5-year plans because that's what we've always done. So it would be interesting to talk to your facilitators and find out, you know, how successful are groups in actually implementing it when we do those 5-year blocks, and think forward like that, as opposed to bigger plans like maybe Mark's idea, a bigger plan that has smaller chunks in it, real distinct chunks. Anyway, I just wondered if that was what we've always done, so that's what we're always doing.
I appreciate that, Georgia, and I have just my own thought, but I see that I think it was John Breslin raised his hand. John, did you have something to mention here?
No, it wasn't me. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, there's someone named R. John. Who's R. John?
That's John Doyle.
Oh, John Doyle. I'm sorry, John. Go ahead, John.
That's all right. Actually, generally speaking, in government, the 5-year plan is standard. And yeah, I think there is some danger of doing it because that's the way it's always been done. But I do think that most of the time it's probably best, because much longer than 5 years, you can't really predict what the lay of the land is going to be, politically, socially, economically, all of that. And much shorter than that, you're really not looking far enough ahead. So I tend to think it's, generally speaking, unless in a particular situation somebody can prove it isn't, I do think that that's the right default period of time.
Hey,
Thank you.
Tanner.
Is that Renee?
Yes, sorry.
Yes, please go ahead.
I just wanted to say I'm in total support of what John said. If 10 years is also very daunting, where people seem to get disheartened or lose steam when some of your goals and objectives are so big. If you don't see incremental progress towards that, people tend to get disheartened. They tend to kind of lose faith. As John also mentioned, a lot can happen between the 1st year and the 10th year of what you put something together. And 5 years it doesn't set you in stone, but it seems to be that sweet spot. Some of the other collaboratives that have 5-year plans also tend to have annual work plans for each one of their work groups that feed into that 5-year plan. So it's also another option where the work groups can have more discrete or incremental metrics that feed into the 5-year plan, and just use that 5-year plan as kind of a sounding board as to whether they're on the right track or not. But nothing really precludes the team from reevaluating or readjusting your strategic plan once it's written either.
I appreciate that. And any other conversation on that point? I think the big thing I'm hearing, oh, please go ahead, whoever that was.
That was Angie. I'm just agreeing with what's being said. I mean, I think the important thing to bake into this is a process and a commitment to checking in on the plan, right? You know, at least annually, because maybe adjustments, modifications need to be made, And what Renee is saying, you have ways to measure incremental progress.
Tanner?
Yes, Susan, I think.
Yes, agree with everyone. I think longer than 5 years would be too long.
Yeah.
I do think when you look at our mission, which is keeping the water safe through land conservation, I don't know how you do an emphasis on a shorter term plan, but because the clock is ticking so quickly on development in Berkeley and Jefferson County, I feel that a lot needs to be put into the first year plan or a 2-year plan, because there is an exigence. There is, I don't know how many of you have watched what happened to your commutes. I know mine has just been devoured by development. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Susan.
I
And
did.
David Lillard, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, thank you. I guess I'm going to be the contrarian on this. Well, we know we'll be sitting in front of our computers for another 2 years. I do think it's essential for us to know where we want to be in 10 years and to know where we want to be in 5 years, and then take a chunk of that that says, what can we do in the next 3 years to queue us up to be where we want to be in 5 years? And then, as someone pointed out, that's a good time to evaluate, to say, are we close to our 3-year milestones? Do we need to revisit things?
I appreciate that. And the two things I take away from all of this is, first, where everyone's talking about here is that the critical need here is, regardless of the time frame, is that the plan is actionable and that it leads to sincere and real action towards achieving our mission. The second thing I want to make sure we also convey, I meant to mention this at the beginning, as this conversation today is to help put us in the mindset of thinking about the strategic planning process and the strategic plan that we'll receive. But it's not that we'll be making any decisions on today's call, or it's more so just to really get a jump start on this conversation, so that when the contractor starts working with us, we'll be that much further ahead. That'll get us closer to success from day one. Just as we move forward, I think that's important to convey that we won't be talking really content or making any decisions about the plan, but really getting all of our minds collectively thinking about this process. So I'm going to move forward because we have several other.
I think Chuck's trying to get in.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I had another comment on this topic, if you don't mind.
Okay, we got a lot on this. Okay, all right.
Sorry.
So let's do those two. Chuck first. I think someone said Chuck was.
Well, I think most of the comments are appropriate. And you got to remember the key word on this is strategy. It has to be over a longer time frame, and 5 years is reasonable. But as the other ones pointed out, what that strategic plan needs to be is a time frame for sub-action plans that are more short-term, being 1 year or 2 year. Okay.
Right.
So to me, the view is that strategy in 5 years a good time frame because of all the changes that have been mentioned.
So strategy happens at the longer time frame. Action happens on those shorter time frames in between. The difference between an action plan and a strategic plan, and incorporating both of those into our final product. And was there another voice that spoke up?
Yeah, sorry, this is Sylvia. Just a couple of thoughts. One is from the perspective of the National Source Water Collaborative. Like you, we have a vision statement, which seems like similar to what you developed. Ours is shorter, but what you developed early on. And we have an annual action plan. And even within that, which we developed that with the members, but even within that, our facilitator helps us break out the tasks that we're going to commit to for the year on a quarterly basis. And then she reminds us, where are we? It's already June, and we were going to do X. And I've found that really invaluable because everybody is busy and it's different. Obviously, our kinds of actions are different, I think, but
Mhm.
it's really helpful to have it broken down that way so we make consistent progress and we can share with members what we're doing. It increases our value to members, I hope. And the other thing that I started thinking about was funding. When you mentioned funding it, sources as an outcome eventually. So one question, you, I believe, probably have more experience with this than I do, but that's an issue for the National Collaborative as well. So one question is, what are funders looking for? And a 5-year strategic plan might well be something they would like to see from a group, as well as accomplishments and everything else. But that's just something to keep in mind as you move forward in terms of if funders are a possible audience, what content you might want to have.
I appreciate that, Sylvia, and you actually hit on a couple key things that we're going to hit on our next slide. So that's a perfect segue, but I see that I think John Doyle raised his hand also.
Thanks, Tanner. What you might want to consider, I'm listening to the discussion, is something like a 5-year rolling plan, where you say you set up a 5-year plan, but every year you sit down and look at it, and maybe you extend it another year. Or maybe every 2 years you do that, something like that. So each time you're looking at least 5 years into the future from that point. Anyway, just an idea for consideration.
Appreciate it. Thank you all for the robust conversation on that. Like I mentioned, when it came to Sylvia's comments, the next question we had asked in our survey was what components of strategic plans are most important. They were ranked here from what was most important to folks to least important. I'm going to come back to this slide and we'll have a discussion around this slide. But I do also want to show the same information as with weighted averages. If they were essentially scored, they got a score of 5, or moderately important 3, etc. And it's important to convey that even though there were differences, they all fell except for one in that essential or very important range, with a SWOT analysis, an analysis of our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, falling only slightly below very important. So it's important to look at it in both ways, just to see that there's some variations, and we'll talk on that, but none of them fell below that level of being not important or slightly important, etc. So to go back to this, as you're starting to look at it, a couple of key insights I'll share before we open it up is I think the first 3 are what we would anticipate would jump out: a mission, which we have, long-term goals, as well as short-term objectives for reaching those. I think below there, the 2 underneath those are also important to point out that one of the most important things for our collaborative that we want to convey with our plan is who we are, who the collaborative is, who the partners are, ranked really high here. And I think that shows just the commitment of the collaborative effort that we're undertaking. And below that are the 2 things that I think Sylvia's comments hit on, and several other folks, is A, that there needs to be an actionable plan for how we'll meet those objectives that feed into our long-term goals, as well as a funding strategy of how we're going to pay for all of this, how we're going to increase the amount of conservation dollars coming into the Eastern Panhandle that would make our plan and our actions a reality, as well as continuing to sustain our work as a whole as the collaborative. So I wanted to throw out those key insights as you were also looking at this, just with the question of what jumps out to you, and if there are any key insights that you'd like to share with the group regarding this question.
Well, the one that kind of sticks out to me, and you opened this conversation, I think, with the vision.
Mm-hmm.
So it definitely has to be, paramount in the strategic plan, even though it's rated low here.
Agreed, and that's why I showed it as weighted averages. It just to show that they all fell pretty much in that very important to essential range. The other thing, in addition to the vision, I think it was John Doyle that maybe said it, or maybe it was David Lillard who mentioned, looking at 10 years, that one of the things, components of the strategic plans is looking farther out than that. You could call it a forecasting section, or what the future environment looks like and how our work both will impact that future environment as well as be impacted by that future environment, and trying to, as part of what might be a shorter term plan, still take a longer term view of that. So any other conversations here before we move on?
Well, you bring up a pretty good, interesting word, and that is the environment. What is the environment you're working in? And maybe that needs to be documented in your strategic plan.
Yeah, and I think the term here, environment, isn't just referring to natural resources directly, but the community. What's happening holistically around the Eastern Panhandle that would have an impact, again, impact on our work, or that we would have an impact on that environment. But it's a way for us to still meet some of the thoughts that the partners conveyed of at least looking further than maybe the scope of the plan to see in the future what our impact would be. So that was one question is what components would be included. Another question that followed that was, what high-level recommendations do you have either for our process for the strategic plan or the plan itself? We created a word cloud from those, and we'll share some of the key insights and quotes. That it needs to be agile and responsive with short-term action plans that can be measured or evaluated on a regular basis. So we heard a lot of those comments from folks on this call already, that we need to know our goal, that we can't hit goals and objectives that aren't clearly defined. Here's one I really like, that the process is just as important as the product. And this is something that we really need to remember. And it's one of the reasons why we're doing this call today, that this process in and of itself, regardless of having a great plan, but by doing the process, we'll be building collaboration and cohesion amongst our partners. This quote, they use 4 words I think are really concise and helpful, that it needs to be short, focused, dynamic, and measurable, and also that everyone has the opportunity to contribute. This person kind of elaborated on that further, that the process needs to not only allow for all voices to be heard, but for all of those voices to be seriously considered, that we all have input that we can give and input that can be incorporated into the plan, so that the plan is truly owned by all of us. And then kind of along those lines, the importance and strength of our cross-sector partnership, and the importance of diversity amongst our partners, and that the voices of water utilities and the voices of land trusts and the voices of farmland protection boards and community groups and watershed groups, that all of us are bringing our unique strengths and interests, and we want to make sure we plug those diverse voices into the plan so that we can all be represented within it. So are there any words here that kind of jump out at you, or quotes that resonate that you would like to discuss with the group? And it is okay if there's not. We want to welcome the conversation, but definitely not force it. So if I'm not hearing anything on this one, we'll move on to the next. The next question was similar, but framed a little bit different. The question was, in addition to the strategic plan itself, what do you hope that we gain by going through this process? And again, we have some word clouds and quotes to go with it. That by doing this process, we'll have a stronger collaborative community, and that by doing that, we can really rise to be leaders as a model for water-focused conservation in West Virginia. We can do something that's truly special and unique of marrying source water protection with land conservation at a regional scale, and building a partnership that's a model for others. Here they gave us 4 kind of cohesive sections: shared leadership, cohesive and coordinated action plans, stronger and better working relationships, And the last one I think is really key, that by participating in the process, by sharing in the objectives and actionably implementing the plans, that will have stronger organizations by virtue of participating in the collaborative. So not only is the collaborative stronger with your participation, but the organizations that we all represent will be stronger by plugging into the model and bringing the work into the work of the collaborative. A sense of identity and better understanding of who we all are, both as organizations, but even more importantly as individuals and as residents of the Eastern Panhandle. They elaborate here further, developing a relationship of working together. There's immense strength, not just for the collaborative, but for our community as a whole, for our organizations to find ways to work together on this that leads to other ways that we can work together in the future. This is probably my favorite quote of this grouping, that the strategic planning process will give us a clear idea of how we can contribute and whether it's worth our time to participate. And I think that's critical. We know from our skills and interest survey last month and from conversations with you all that time is the most critical factor for all of this work. And by doing the strategic plan, we'll understand the collaborative better and each other better, and where we fit into that, and whether that is truly worth what is our limited time in order to participate. And what I like about this last quote is it's not just better rapport amongst our partners, but it's an opportunity to have better relations with our community that we're aiming to serve, and that the plan and the process can serve as an opportunity to engage our community into our work. So again, here, as you've looked at the word cloud and seen some of those quotes, is there anything that jumps out to you or anything that resonates that you would like to discuss with the group? Okay. So if we ever want to come back and reference these, just let me know. We'll move forward with some of the other questions that we asked. One of the questions we asked is a kind of a quicker one here, but how important is design into the overall, how we envision our strategic plan looking like? If you can imagine, not important would be a plan that is really great content, but more so just words. Essential would be a plan that's mostly pictures with a few words here and there. And what folks said is that design is, slightly important to moderately important. One of the reasons why we ask this is this kind of dovetails off the next group of questions in the survey, but it's information we can feed to our contractor to let them know that not only is strong content really important, but that the design itself is really important for increasing our ability to engage not just collaborative partners, but our community in reading the plan, understanding the plan, and using it as a tool for dynamic action. So I don't have any insights here to share. Does anyone have anything that they would like to convey on that point?
Tanner, just if it would be helpful to the group in the future, this Google Action Network is doing the same thing right now. They pulled from, I'd say, like 8 different reports to look at their current design, which is very verbose, and trying to figure out which design resonates best with their group. So if it would help in the future, as I said, I can send you all of those links for everyone to view if that would be of interest.
I think so, yeah, and that's actually, the way you phrase that is exactly, so Renee, yes, please share those resources, and as a collaborative, we should all, take those opportunities to share whenever we can, as we move forward. And what you just described, Renee, is what we tried to capture in the next portion of this survey, which was we asked the 20 people that responded to the survey if they had time to review 3 plans and kind of do that same sort of thing, is look at 3 different plans and their designs and their layouts and say what worked and what didn't. Out of the 20 people that responded, all but 1 took that extra bit of time. So thank you for everyone that took the extra time on this section. Really important, some key considerations before we discuss the results, that the observations and the discussion we'll have on the following slides, the survey respondents were asking the question of whether or not those plans that they were reviewing were a good model for us to follow. not whether the plans and the content within them were good. So it was more so looking at the design and the style. We had said, to folks, take 1 to 2 minute tops to look at these really big, important documents. It was not a deep dive into content. So again, they were looking at the plan saying, this is what I envision a strategic plan for us could look like, not whether or not the plans themselves were good. And again, the reason for doing this, like Renee just mentioned, it's invaluable information that we can convey up to our contractor that we'll be working with on our plan over the next year, so they can see from the get-go where we envision, what we envision our strategic plan should look like. I'm not going to read this slide, but the important thing to say is that we worked to find 3 different strategic plans that had different variables and different designs and layouts and content, so that we can kind of dive into a little bit about what worked and what didn't for each plan. So where we start, we looked at the Land Trust Alliance's 5-year 2018 to 2022 strategic plan. You can see some of the screenshots here of what that plan looked like. Some of the things folks liked about it is that it was well organized, had a pleasing design and clear goals, but it tended to be a little bit tedious and a little bit long were some of the words we heard from folks. Just some quick quotes on that. It was a little bit wordy, even though it was crisp and clean. It did have clear measures of success that we've already talked about are important for us, but maybe could have been better organized. It did have a logical, easy to follow flow, but it wasn't as engaging as perhaps as an outreach tool. And then it was just in general too long and wordy. So what I would ask, if anyone that reviewed this document, participated in this portion of the survey, or anyone with just insight into that particular strategic plan, is there anything that you'd like to add or anything you'd like to share with the group? We lost everyone from the beginning slide where we started here. Please feel free to jump in. If I'm not hearing anyone on that one, we'll move forward to the rest here. The second plan that folks looked at was the Deschutes Land Trust. It's a 10-year strategic plan. If you can tell from the screenshots here, it's a booklet style. It's an 11 by 17 fold over booklet style. And it's more so a tool for outreach. It's really designed to be like appealing and engaging. It ranked out of the 3 the highest. It was shorter. The brevity was good. The design was really nice. But 2 key things that it was missing is, it didn't at all clearly articulate the goals of the plan, which led to a large amount of that lack of accountability for how they would measure success and how they would get there. As we've already talked, those are pretty important for us. So again, it's the right length, it's achievable and specific, and it looks nice, but it doesn't have very many concrete statements or ideas and no measures of success. They liked that it's short and engaging, but it didn't feel as professional as some of the other plans. And again, lastly, as a tool for engaging the community, this one probably did the best job of that. So again, if there are there any comments from folks that's familiar with this plan or that reviewed this one?
Hello, this is Matt.
Hey, Matt.
How are you?
I'm well.
Good.
I'm sitting in Bill's office because I can open the window. It's nice.
Oh yeah, you could go mine too if you want to. Mine's cleaner.
Is Matt not talking?
No one else is in his, and it's kind of.
Matt is having another conversation.
Okay. Matt, it was very strange because it sounded like he was jumping in right at the right time. Okay. Sorry. Matt has been muted, folks. Let me get back into my presentation view here. 1 second. Okay.
Tanner, just one
Georgia,
comment. This is Georgia. So in looking at just those 2, one of the things that strikes me in looking back at them again is the primary target. If your primary target is it as an outreach tool, it looks and feels and reads very differently than if the primary target and purpose is a useful guidance for an internal group, that it's okay for it to be published and shared in an open forum. But if the primary target is outreach versus in-reach and in-use, the look and feel is very different. And so when I looked back again at the second example, I think I understand why some of those pieces were missing. And there may have been a internal companion piece, but I think their target was the community rather than their internal group in the way that they put it together. Not having talking to them, I don't know, but that's, looking at it again, that's the way it appears.
Agreed, and it's not a point that we would want to try to find a way to come to consensus today, but it's a question that we wanted to plant the bug today, that we would, in the early stages of our planning process, be able to come to a consensus if we want to be more of an inward document, more of an outward document, or somewhere in the middle, because it's not one or the other. There is a spectrum there. And again, it's one of the reasons why we picked that plan, just because it was different from the other two in that main aspect of who it was maybe directed towards.
Exactly.
Any other comments to go with George's there?
Yeah, I think, Georgia, that's an excellent point. I would add further that, to me, you've got to have a strategic plan that is internal as a core document. If you want to do something glossy for the public as an auxiliary document, by all means. But with my board, our 5-year plan has a 1-3-5-year component to it. There's exactly 2 pictures. There's a pretty farm on the cover. There's a picture of the current board inside and 1 map. The remainder of the document is text, including an appendix that we update constantly to track what goals we've actually are working toward achieving. So that's why with all 3 of those plans that were up, I typically panned all of them because they were too glossy, they were too much for the public. And from my perspective, they weren't a core text-based document that the group uses to track our progress. And again, I think Georgia made an excellent point that if you want to do something for the public, then yeah, add pictures, but otherwise it should be basically a pretty core document.
Thank you, Mark. Anything else before we look at the third one? Okay, so the third plan was the Atlantic Coastal Fish Habitat Partnerships 5-year plan. I kind of saw this one as a hybrid of the two when it came to that design element. And as such, it scored in the middle between the other two, that it was that hybrid approach, good design and good content. One challenge with this one, it was the longest of the 3. So it was overly detailed, overly long. And that one word that came up several times was that it was academic. It was too, it talked at a level that was maybe talking above people, that it wouldn't truly engage them. So again, some quotes that it was lengthy, but it was a well laid out and well organized. Here, someone said, they didn't see it as a match to where our collaborative was developmental wise. And what
Tanner,
yes.
your screen share needs to be turned back on.
Oh, it's not? Thank you so much.
Thank you. I thought it was just me.
Give me 1 second, folks. Angie, thank you for saying so. Are you seeing my screen now?
Nope.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for speaking up before we went too much further. So I was to this.
People see it. I still do not see it. Maybe it is my personal problem.
No, it's not.
No, I don't see it either.
Not on.
Okay.
There we go.
There you go.
All right. You're seeing half of it. Now I just got to pull up the presentation. How are we now?
Yay.
We're on the rating for, I guess, the third plan.
Very good. Okay, where it says 3.2 up top.
Yep.
Right.
Very good. Okay. Thank you, folks, for help with the technical issue there. So where we were was for the Atlantic Coastal Fish Habitat Partnerships plan, that they didn't see this as a match for where our collaborative is developmentally. It was a bit long. They had a lengthy 2 or 3 page section on their history that we don't have as a newer group, and some other sections that just didn't apply to us. And that here they sum it up well, that it has excellent content and mission, but it wasn't as good of a tool for dynamic action. And then lastly, that it was, for this person, the best of the 3, could have used a little bit less pictures, perhaps a little bit more on the content. So any conversation or comments on that third plan? Okay. So,
Hey, Ken.
was someone speaking up?
Yeah, this is Bo Williams with EPA.
Hey, Bo.
How you doing? Really excellent slideshow here, Tanner. I think that you should trust your instincts in general about presentation, first of all. But just a few thoughts on the sort of design and presentation of the plan. I mean, I think you selected some good plans here. And, another way to think about this plan is that as an advertisement of sorts. I mean, this is a partnership, and you have a number of important partners, but the funding aspect is certainly key moving forward. And so I think people can get caught in trap of making plans too wordy or technical and stuff like that. And that's useful maybe for more internal looking, but finding a sort of a middle ground between too fluffy and pretty and practical is probably the right way. And keeping an eye on you know, how you can sort of simply present how, as you mentioned before, how people can get involved, where there are opportunities for investment, how it benefits them. That's valuable for internal audiences and sort of creating a roadmap. And having that roadmap is something that external audiences want as well, and making it very obvious to them how they can benefit. So maybe somewhere in between the sort of designs here, of course.
Much appreciated, Bo. And I think that's the crux of the conversation. And of the 3, it would be that Atlantic Coastal Fish Habitat Partnerships that you know, based on the survey results, straddled that line for folks a little bit more. So I appreciate the feedback and the compliment on the presentation, Bo. And anything else for folks before we move to the final phase of the conversation?
Tanner?
Yes, Susan, I think. So I can't see people's faces when I'm in presentation mode.
Sorry.
So I think it was Susan. Go ahead.
Yes, this is Susan. I just wanted to say, and you know, I think that the art of critique is very important in how we frame thoughts. And just reading people's comments, I was really impressed by their thought processes and their integrity. It makes me feel very confident that we can create a very fine strategic plan.
I think that's a really nice sentiment, and I would just add to that's where we started in this conversation of, on that slide that said thank you, of when we put our minds together and really put our, you know, energy into the work, we'll continue to have these strong outcomes that we're seeing initially. So I couldn't agree with you more on that, Susan. We have about 10 minutes left, which is perfect. The final phase of the survey was just gathering some quick input regarding the development of a collaborative logo. Again, out of the 20 people that responded, 13 people, again, took some additional time on this optional section to provide insight. So thank you to those folks. Just as a quick, you know, why do we want to go through that process? A logo is a graphic representation of us that we can use to convey our identity on all form of media and outreach that we'll be doing moving forward. It invites people to get to know us. We are still new, and that anything we can do to, again, form that cohesion within our partnership and convey it in a compelling way to our community will be beneficial to us in the long term. And a logo isn't our brand, but going through that process will help us define other key components of our branding, such as preferred fonts and colors and et cetera, and all of those things. So it starts us down the road to really having an identity as a whole of the collaborative. So just in general, the process that we are taking for this is we are starting big and then working it small. So we're soliciting feedback from the collaborative and our partners, which was this survey and webinar. We've also formed a 3-person smaller subcommittee of the Education Outreach Work Group that'll take all the feedback that we've received, as well as that work group's conversations on the topic the last couple months. We'll provide that to the contractor that we're working with. We'll assist them with the drafting and editing process, and that subcommittee is who will vote to approve the final logo. So again, starting big, getting feedback from across the collaborative, and then as a small group, working that through with the aim of not, I should say, both gathering feedback far and wide, but also not overworking it. The quote from our contractor, or I should say the quote from our partner that's working on this with us was, if every partner put it in a color, the logo will come out gray. So we don't want a process that takes us, years to come up with a logo, or something that's just a mishmash of too many ideas. So that's our process: start big, work it small. The 2 key questions here that we want to convey are, what symbols or imagery best represent us? And if you can imagine, just with our work, the biggest word here that came up time and time again was drinking, and drinking water in particular. The quotes here, land and water. Expounding on that, the connection between people who drink water and the landscape, something specifically representing drinking water and something specifically representing land, kind of the inverse of that, not just a generic water drop, but something specific to drinking water and landscapes, not just a generic mountain and valley and stream that's used for a lot of logos. And then lastly, someone said, some sort of imagery that represents us as a partnership, and that this is a truly collaborative effort. So those were some of the key words that came up as we gathered that feedback from folks. Is there anything here that jumps out to you all or resonates with you that you would like to discuss with the group? Okay. And then just lastly, the second thing that popped up here, the question we had was, tell us some logos that you do like and why. And the thing that popped up the most is that a logo has to capture our essence, who we are. And in doing so, that it also needs to be clean and simple and crisp and all these good words. And we got a lot of examples from people of logos that our collaborative partners like. So our logo won't be any of these, of course. But it helps to see where people's heads are at when they think of what makes a good logo. We had the first meeting of that subcommittee earlier this week. We're meeting again next week to take into account any conversations that do occur today. And then we'll be moving forward on that process. So anything that folks would like to add regarding the development of a collaborative logo?
Tanner?
Yes.
This is Jackie Milliron.
Hi, Jackie. How are you?
Hey, good. I was hoping my microphone worked today.
All right.
Yeah. So I would just add there, I didn't do any input on this particular item because I don't have any insight on it, except for in thinking that maybe we should focus on the collaborative. It is a collaborative. And I know the partnership thing, but maybe something, not just, trees and rivers and mountains or whatever, but the focus is that we work together and that we are a collaboration. So that's all, that's just my input. That's what I think is important. So if that means anything. So
I appreciate it very much, Jackie. Thank you. Okay. So that wraps up the survey and discussion on strategic planning. Again, thank you for participating in both the survey and this webinar. Again, it'll be recorded, or it has been recorded, it will be posted up on our website along with the survey results and presentations. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly with questions. Lastly, we do want to convey, and on a high note here, it's been a great conversation. We wanted to thank you as well, going back a month, for your feedback and insights during our Skills and Interests survey and webinar in May. Starting in July, we'll be sending out a monthly digital newsletter with news from around the collaborative. So that was something that came up in that conversation. So we want to say that we're working to be responsive to that and start sending out more holistic news from around the collaborative of everything that's happening. So if you're on a work group, you can see what the other work groups or the steering committee is doing. So stay tuned for that. We're really excited to share that with you all. Are there any final questions or discussions that folks would like to have before we sign off today? Okay, well, if not, we'll conclude today's webinar. I will remain on the line if people want to stay and discuss. Thank you for participating and have a good day.